Hello and welcome to the programme. Well, this is an historic day and an inauguration like no other. In less than an hour, Joe Biden is to become the 46th President of the United States. And his running mate, Kamala Harris, is also making history. She'll become the first female, black and Asian American to become Vice President. Now, fears of the spread of COVID-19 and concerns over security mean the city is eerily quiet. The streets are populated only by tens of thousands of members of the National Guard. Now we can see dignitaries here already filing in. We can see Bill Clinton and obviously his wife Hillary Clinton. But one person is notable for their absence, and that is Donald Trump. Donald Trump has become the first president to not attend his successor's swearing in more than 150 years. Donald Trump is, in fact, now away and has left the White House on Air Force One. And he's on his way to Mar-a-Lago, his estate in Florida. He did stop off at Joint Base Andrews to deliver his final speech as president, promising to always fight for his supporters. The 45th president took the chance to highlight his achievements in office while wishing good luck to the incoming administration, although he never mentioned Biden by name.
We rebuilt the United States military. We created a new force called Space Force. That in itself would be a major achievement for a regular administration. We were not a regular administration. We also got tax cuts, the largest tax cut and reform in the history of our country by far. I hope they don't raise your taxes. But if they do, I told you so. A year ago, our numbers were at a level that nobody had ever seen before. And even now, we really built it twice. We got hit. Nobody blames us for that. The whole world got hit, and then we built it again. And now the stock market is actually substantially higher than it was at its higher point prior to the pandemic. I will always fight for you. I will be watching, I will be listening, and I will tell you that the future of this country has never been better. I wish the new administration great luck and great success. I think they'll have great success. They have the foundation to do something really spectacular. And again, we put it in a position like it's never been before, despite the worst plague to hit since, I guess you'd say, 1917, over 100 years ago.
And we will, of course, be following all the events linked to Joe Biden's inauguration live. But first, to Madrid, where the mayor says at least 2 people have died following an apparent gas leak and explosion in the centre of the city. Matthew in the Cube has the latest.
Isabel, this explosion took place shortly after 3 p.m. Central European time in the La Latina district of Madrid. It's a very populous, very famous residential area in the Spanish capital. And this blast just a few hundred metres away from a popular tourist destination, El Puerto de Toledo. I can show you now videos from the scene, and the more important to say that is the latest we have from the emergency services is that we know so far that in this explosion, at least 2 people have been killed, 8 others injured. This includes 6 people who were slightly injured, 1 other moderate and 1 seriously injured. Those people transferred to La Paz Hospital. We know that services from the municipality, health emergency authorities, as well as Madrid Police Nacional are on the scene to establish a cordon and continue an investigation. The mayor of Madrid, quoted by AFP and the Associated Press, as well as Spanish news sources, confirming that this was a gas leak, and that has also been confirmed by other authorities on social media. This was a video that we established here in the Cube that was sent to my colleague Hebe. You can see the effects of this explosion with a cloud of smoke billowing out from where this took place on Calle de Toledo. You can see their police beginning to establish a cordon as bricks and other debris litter the streets, damaging not only other buildings on the other side of the street, but also cars parked as well. We also had testimony from another eyewitness, Emma, who was living just 1 street away from the explosion. This is what she told us.
Shaking of the windows and the doors in the building was just, it was, luckily they flexed, but it was a real physical experience. And the noise itself of the explosion lasted around about a second, maybe a second and a half, time slows down, but it was very intense. as I was stood on the balcony, it took a good sort of, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 minutes, but then the smell of burning was in the air.
There we go, Emma, who was living just one street away from this explosion. And we know that, according to Euronews reporter Jaime Velasquez on the scene, fire has been seen inside this building, which was damaged. At least 5 of the floors suffering in this explosion. And Isabel, the Prime Minister of Spain, Pedro Sánchez, has said in a tweet that he has described this explosion as terrible. He says that Spain remains attentive to the information that reaching us so far. At least 2 people confirmed to have died, 8 others injured, and we'll be keeping across the latest here in theCUBE.
Matthew, with all the latest, many thanks. Well, the largest ever security operation is currently underway for the swearing of Joe Biden. In a second, we'll be speaking to Andy Rosen, who's just outside the huge ring of steel encircling the Capitol, Washington, D.C. But first, let's go to Ray Suarez. Hi there to you, Ray. So this is a momentous moment for the United States in so many ways, not least the security, as we were saying, that we can see right behind you there.
It is impressive and depressing at the same time. I've been to many of these affairs, and security is always heavy. After all, some of the most powerful people in the world gathered in one place at a time of great tension around the world, but this is different. The last inauguration that didn't feature a very heavy security presence was 2000, when George W. Bush was sworn in, the last inauguration before the 9/11 era. But this is caused by many causes. I mean, the January 6th riot and attack on the Capitol building raised security consciousness to levels not before seen, even for an event like this, plus COVID-19, which is raging through the country. So the VIPs that'll be gathered on the west front of the Capitol will be distanced, sitting far apart from each other. And part of the reason they're there is to show the unity of the government going forward. Republicans and Democrats sitting together, people who are sometimes political enemies when it comes to the jousting and tussling that goes on in the building behind me, sitting together, watching a new president take office. This will be just an event that's beyond strange when it comes to those sorts of norms and traditions of American life and American politics.
Okay, Ray, we're going to come back to you in just a few moments. Let's pause and watch some of these live pictures that we're getting out of the US Capitol right now. So we're now seeing all the Supreme Court justices file through there. And just a few moments ago, we saw Kamala Harris, Barack Obama, George W. Bush. We've also seen Amy Coney Barron and so many dignitaries. George W. Bush, we can just see him there to the left of the screen. So quite a star-studded event. But as we were saying, one person who is not here is US President Donald Trump. His Vice President, though, Mike Pence, is reportedly at this ceremony. We haven't seen him yet. We'll be watching out for him, of course.
The children of Vice President-elect Harris and Mr. Douglas Imhoff, Cole Mackin Imhoff, and Ella Rose Imhoff.
So if you're just joining us, you're seeing live pictures here of Joe Biden's inauguration ceremony. Now, it is clearly a slimmed-down affair compared to previous inauguration ceremonies because of concerns of COVID-19, but also clearly security after the events of Capitol Hill 2 weeks ago. Now, we've seen a number of dignitaries coming in to this ceremony. Here we can see Bill Clinton just there on the screen, and he's standing by George Bush, Barack Obama there, and Michelle Obama as well. So quite an impressive lineup. And Amy Coney Barrett, the latest Supreme Court Justice to be appointed, just spotted her a second ago. So an exciting day for the United States. Let's listen in to what's taking place. seeing the Biden family come through to the ceremony here for the inauguration of Joe Biden, a moment that Joe Biden has waited for all his life. Of course, let's remember he did run for the presidency and didn't make it, but he has been vice president to Barack Obama, who is president and who was president and is present today. But now the family of Joe Biden filing to attend, and we're going to expecting Joe Biden to arrive any moment now. And we're going to be sitting on these live pictures with you, listening in and commenting, but just taking in the atmosphere of this momentous day in Washington, D.C. Here we can see the Supreme Court justices who are in attendance. Now let's remember there that during the Donald Trump 4 years in the presidency, now that Supreme Court has switched into the Republican favor with the last appointment there of Amy Coney Barrett, and we saw her a few moments ago there on our screen. There we see the George W. Bush and Laura Bush just there. So everybody waiting now for the arrival of Joe Biden. And here we're seeing the arrival of Joe Biden's family. We just saw them going through the corridors a moment ago, and here they are out on the steps of Capitol Hill. And now one of the very interesting guests to be in attendance to this inauguration ceremony is Mike Pence. Now, he is still vice president until Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are sworn in. And obviously that has caused and stirred quite a lot of controversy because he was not attending Donald Trump's event just a few moments ago as Donald Trump left Washington, D.C. So if you're joining us live now, we are watching live pictures of the inauguration of Joe Biden. We have been seeing a number of dignitaries arrive, a whole swathe of former US presidents from George W. Bush and Bill Clinton, who was accompanied by Hillary Clinton. Also the Supreme Court judges, all there on the steps of Capitol Hill, just that 2 weeks ago was ransacked by a mob. Now let's listen in to the ceremony.
The Honorable Julie E. Adams and Chief Administrative Officer of the House of Representatives, Catherine Spindor.
So Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton there, and we can see Michelle Obama just there to the left of Bill Clinton. So this is an event which is taking place obviously in the middle of a COVID-19 pandemic in the United States. Joe Biden has got a lot on his list of priorities.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice President of the United States, the Honorable Michael R. Pence and Mrs. Karen Pence.
So as you heard just there, that is Mike Pence and Karen Pence. And as we were just saying just a few moments ago, interestingly that Mike Pence is here, but President Donald Trump is not at this ceremony. He's on his way, was already arrived, in fact, in Florida to his estate in Mar-a-Lago. Vice President Mike Pence did not attend the ceremony that took place just a few moments ago, that was held by Donald Trump holding his own ceremony before departing Washington, D.C. Awkward moment there for Vice President Mike Pence, abandoned by the US President Donald Trump as he attends this ceremony. Reports of a rift between the two, possibly supported by his presence here alone. And those Supreme Court judges that you can see who are wearing the black robes, George W. Bush, all wearing masks, not necessarily socially distanced or as socially distanced as some may require. But Joe Biden has made very clear that one of his first acts as US president is to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic hands-on, and his appointment to the Treasury Secretary is going to be given quite a portfolio to help lift the country out of the economic crisis that it's in. Watching this with us is our reporter Andy Rosegen. Now, Andy is in Washington, just outside Capitol Hill. And Andy, as we're just looking at these pictures, I'd love you to comment on them, because this really is a very different ceremony. We haven't seen an inauguration like it before, not only because Donald Trump isn't present, but also quite a star-studded guest list compared to Trump's inauguration. So just talk us through what we've been seeing in the last hour or so.
Well, first of all, Isabel, I should point out that where I am is as close as any mere mortal is going to get to the inauguration. Ordinary Americans simply can't get in past where I am out here, out by the Capitol. Of course, everyone was shooed away by the rioting and the security. Security is so tight for this. What's interesting is that we understand that those people who were going to attend the inauguration ceremony had to undergo a COVID test because obviously even before the rioting, COVID was the other issue that was guaranteed to slim this inauguration down. There are reports that Donald Trump was stewing about the guest list here for this inauguration. The entertainment involved tonight will be Jennifer Lopez and Lady Gaga and Tom Hanks. So they're going to try to make it as much as a normal, under the circumstances, kind of inauguration. Joe Biden always said he wanted to keep it outside. He didn't want to be chased indoors by the rioting. But outside here where I am, you know, it's just a handful of people are out here. Some people selling T-shirts that saying, Donald Trump, you're fired. There are people who've come here from miles away in Seattle and Massachusetts, people who've been to inaugurations before who simply can't get in like no one can, the ordinary folks, but they want to be here just to be a part of this moment. I talked to one man from Massachusetts who said, look, I don't even care about seeing Joe Biden put his hand up and take the oath of office. I just want to be in D.C. on this historic day. Isabel?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I'd just like to just speak to Ray now just for a few moments because, Ray, now we know that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have arrived at the Capitol. We haven't really seen them yet, and they are going to be sworn in just a few moments from now. But just talk us through what is going to happen, how a swearing-in ceremony takes place.
The Vice President of the United States takes the oath of office first. The oath is administered by the Chief Justice of the United States in normal circumstances. There have been times where the oath has been administered by others in times of emergency or the sudden death of a president. But in a normal inauguration, it's the Chief Justice. And one of the things that does is symbolically show the branches of the government joining in assent that one person should become the chief executive of the United States. And then the president is sworn and gives his inaugural address. At that point, at that moment, he is invested with tremendous power. We should remember that at this very minute, Donald Trump is still the president of the United States, and Mike Pence is still the vice president of the United States. If something terrible, if something untoward were to happen right now, it would be Donald Trump's chain of command that would be responding to it. At 12 o'clock, whether he takes the oath of office or not, Joe Biden becomes president of the United States. Donald Trump's
now, Ray, I'm just
term
going to interrupt
expires.
you there because we can see Kamala Harris and her husband arriving there. So let's just watch those pictures as they file through those corridors of the Capitol, and we will see them emerging any moment now on the terraces. Now, this is an historic day for so many reasons, but not least this vice president. An amazing moment in terms of diversity and inclusion for the United States. Kamala Harris, the first female vice president, and not only the first female vice president, the first vice president who is of Black and Asian descent. So an amazing moment as she takes over this vice presidency in just a few moments for now, and a lot of focus on Kamala Harris because she'll be vice president to one of the oldest presidents, the oldest president to ever take the oath of office. And she has been praising the women who came before me. She said she praised those women who allowed her to be in the position that she is in today. Her mother, her family, all those who've supported her in what has been a long journey bringing this senator to this role of Vice President of the United States, where she will be sworn in just a few moments from now.
Private First Class Eugene O. Goodman.
Now, as we watch these pictures, we have just seen the arrival of Kamala Harris and her husband, Doug Emhoff. Now, he's also making history because he is going to be the first male vice president's partner. And we're going to be expecting next the arrival of Joe Biden. Kamala Harris there coming out to the terraces of Capitol Hill there with her husband, Doug Emhoff. So let's pause and recall just for one moment how historic this is. Kamala Harris has really changed the course for women in the United States, becoming the first vice president of the country. They're being greeted by Barack Obama and Michelle Obama. Barack Obama, of course, the first president of African descent. Well, there is Kamala Harris and her husband greeting Barack Obama. Quite an astounding moment, one that will go down in history, of course. I'm joined now on set by lecturer in US politics, and that's Aurore Bordette, who's going to be joining us throughout today's events. Now, as we were just saying, this is an incredible moment for Kamala Harris, for women of Black, Asian descent, for all ethnic minorities in the United States, and maybe signifying that moment of unity that Joe Biden has been talking about throughout his campaign.
Yes, and very symbolically, Kamala Harris is having this traditional Indian welcome and here on Capitol Hill. There were a traditional Indian celebration with paintings on the ground displayed to really show her heritage. So this is a really important moment. That it will bridge the gap, I'm not sure, because this is a major bone of contention between Republicans and Democrats. It's how important minorities are. And many conservatives are afraid that Joe Biden will lean too much on this political angle and will give too much to minorities.
What do we know about Kamala Harris's policies? And I guess how much power does the vice president have?
Well, she's been a senator, so we know her record as a senator. She comes from California, so she is kind of a quintessential Californian Democrat. We don't know a lot about what she's going to do for now. She's just mainly joined the Biden team, and we can expect her to have an influence on the policies, but for now she's been quite discreet. On that.
Yeah, we remember Barack Obama. Now, Barack Obama has expressed some sort of regret at times that he didn't do enough in terms of bridging the racial divides that run through the country, because the US is divided in so many ways. But if we look at those Black Lives Matter protests, now that is going to be something that Joe Biden and his team are going to have to address, and they're going to have to address it pretty fast.
Right. It was very difficult for Obama to address it because he didn't want to be divisive because he's of African origin. This was a big question during his time in office, and he definitely had difficulties addressing the issue very early on, and did want to create a rift, in the United States. So I think Joe Biden could do a lot more. And he's already planning to do that. His cabinet nominees do represent a much more diverse America. And we know that in his first 100 days in office, he's going to push for minority legislation.
Let's take a little pause here, Aurore, and just watch these pictures and soak in the moment, because we can see Joe Biden and Jill Biden there just walking in. Now, we've seen a number of people come down this way, but this is really the moment we have been waiting for.
Stand by. Ready. Face. Port. Arms. Forward. Ball.
So briefly, Aurore, as we just watched Joe Biden there come in, this is the moment he's been waiting for pretty much his whole life, isn't it?
Right, and it's been a long time coming because Joe Biden has been in Washington since the 1970s. So he's spent his whole life in Washington, and he's made several attempts at the presidency that failed quite early on, and he kind of always had a sort of a background role, he was not taken seriously by some of his opponents. So this was really kind of the coming of his entire career, to be able to access to the presidency. And he was able in the primaries to show that his brand of centrist Democrat would be appealing to voters, and he was able to prove that he was the man for the job.
Absolutely. So to remind all our viewers, we now have Joe Biden and his wife Jill. They have arrived on Capitol Hill. We've seen them filing through those corridors of this magnificent building in Washington, D.C., well, the home of government in the U.S. Kamala Harris is also there. She's out on the terraces. She's been greeted by Barack Obama. Let's just listen in and enjoy this trumpet fanfare at the ceremony.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President-elect of the United States, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., and Dr. Jill Biden. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Please welcome the Honorable Amy Klobuchar.
Vice President Pence, Mr. President-elect, Madam Vice President-elect, members of Congress and the judicial branch, former presidents and first ladies, vice presidents, leaders from abroad, and a whole bunch of Bidens. America, welcome to the 59th presidential inauguration, where in just a few moments, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will take their solemn oaths. This ceremony is the culmination of 244 years of a democracy. It is the moment when leaders brought to this stage by the will of the people promise to be faithful to our Constitution, to cherish it and defend it. It is the moment when they become, as we all should be, guardians of our country. Have we become too jaded, too accustomed to the ritual of the passing of the torch of democracy to truly appreciate what a blessing and a privilege it is to witness this moment? I think not. 2 weeks ago, when an angry, violent mob staged an insurrection and desecrated this temple of our democracy, it awakened us to our responsibilities as Americans. This is the day when our democracy picks itself up, brushes off the dust, and does what America always does: goes forward as a nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This conveyance of a sacred trust between our leaders and our people takes place in front of this shining Capitol dome for a reason. When Abraham Lincoln gave his first inaugural address in front of this Capitol, the dome was only partially constructed, braced by ropes of steel. He promised he would finish it. He was criticized for spending funds on it during the Civil War. To those critics, he replied, "If the people see the Capitol going on, it is a sign we intend the Union shall go on." And it did, and it will. Generations of Americans gave their lives to preserve our republic in this place. Great legislation to protect civil rights and economic security and lead the world was debated and crafted under this dome. Now it falls on all of us, not just the two leaders we are inaugurating today, to take up the torch of our democracy, not as a weapon of political arson, but as an instrument for good. We pledge today never to take our democracy for granted as we celebrate its remarkable strength. We celebrate its resilience, its grit. We celebrate the ordinary people doing extraordinary things for our nation, the doctors and nurses on the front line of this pandemic, the officers in the Capitol, a new generation never giving up hope for justice. We celebrate a new president, Joe Biden, who vows to restore the soul of America and cross the river of our divides to a higher plane. And we celebrate our first African American, first Asian American, and first woman vice president, Kamala Harris, who stands on the shoulders of so many on this platform who have forged the way to this day. When she takes the oath of office, little girls and boys across the world will know that anything and everything is possible. And in the end, that is America, our democracy, a country of so much good. And today, on these Capitol steps and before this glorious field of flags, we rededicate ourselves to its cause. Thank you. It is now my honor to introduce to you the senator who has worked with me and so many others to make this ceremony possible, my friend and the chair of the inaugural committee, Missouri Senator Roy Blunt.
Well, I should have known when Senator Klobuchar got involved, at least there'd be a touch of snow up here this morning. Of all the things we'd considered, I don't think snow was on my agenda till I walked out the door a moment ago. But thank you, Senator Klobuchar, and thanks to the other members of the Joint Congressional Committee on the Inauguration as we officially begin the 59th inaugural ceremony. I also want to thank
So you were
the
just
Joint
listening
Committee
there to
staff and our
Senator Amy Klobuchar. Now, she was delivering welcome remarks and reminding, very pointedly, the US citizens and people around the world listening in on the importance of democracy, telling them really pretty much not to take it for granted, and also reminding people of America of the seismic power in some respects that the US can have in terms of having a vice president like Kamala Harris, a vice president who is, as she reminds us, the first female vice president and the first of Black and Asian descent. Now, I'd like to bring in our reporters who are at Capitol Hill, and would just like to get them to comment on what we've just been hearing there. And Ray, if you can hear me, Ray Suarez. Now, I think you were listening to Senator Amy Klobuchar, and that was quite an inspirational speech, wasn't it?
And very important symbolically, because Amy Klobuchar was one of the people who wanted to be on that stage taking the oath of office today. She was a candidate in the Democratic primaries opposing both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris for the position of president. It is part of the unity message to show that this is one government going forward. It even makes more apparent the absence of the president at this moment. You have past Republican and Democratic presidents on that stage, and people who were opponents of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris all coming together on the west front of the Capitol to watch this spectacle.
Now, I'd like to bring you in, Ray, Andy Roseden. I mean, Andy, who's also watching this unfurl from the Capitol as close as he can possibly get, as he's reminded us. Because one issue that keeps coming up again and again is that of inclusion and diversity, particularly as we saw Kamala Harris. And what's interesting, isn't it, is that she's going to be sworn in by one of the Supreme Court justices, Sonia Sotomayor, who's also the first woman of color in the court. This is a message that is being driven home again and again at this ceremony, isn't it?
Yeah, and this is not lost on some of the people who are out here beside me who are watching this from afar. You've got plenty of African Americans out here who really are embracing this moment. It's as if they're going back in time to President Obama's inauguration. I talked to one woman, an African American woman from Seattle, who flew all the way here and picked up some gifts in the gift shop of little bobbleheads of dolls of President Obama and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and she put them on a concrete barrier using the Capitol Dome as the background to take some silly selfies. But she really talked about how important this was for her. She said that what she saw at the Capitol rioting a couple of weeks ago was white supremacy. So none of this is lost on some of the folks out here. I mentioned earlier, there were folks out here selling T-shirts that said, Donald Trump, you're fired. They were Black young men who certainly were excited that we're seeing this change. And one more thing is about the people out here. You know, I passed on the way here in the taxi cab a home in a residential area near here that just had a big sign out, a handmade sign that said January 20th. So many Trump critics and Biden supporters, that's all they cared about. They were just limping to the finish line, trying to get to this moment. They were so fed up with Donald Trump. They told me over the course of the election and the campaign season, they were just limping to the finish line, so worn out by him that all they wanted to do was get to this moment, January 20th.
Yeah, absolutely. Try to get this moment. But Andy, interestingly, isn't it, as we were just saying, Donald Trump isn't there. But we have heard, in fact, that he did leave a note for President-elect Joe Biden. That's quite a tradition, at least one tradition we can say that Donald Trump respected.
And won't it be interesting when we find out what that note says, if it's ever released? I'm assuming it will. It's a long-held tradition that a lot of people thought Donald Trump might skip this time, as he has skipped many other traditions. But we'll just have to wait and see how that looks whenever it comes out.
And Andy, this is obviously not the day about Donald Trump. This is Joe Biden's day. This is a moment, as I was chatting to her on set here, that Joe Biden has been waiting for his whole life, practically, to get to this point. And we're not far off, are we? We're not far off from that swearing-in ceremony.
Right. And, you know, I talked to so many people who said that they were appealed by Joe Biden by his empathy, especially during the COVID crisis. I talked to so many people, even Donald Trump's former campaign manager, who said that his lack of empathy during the COVID crisis probably sunk him in this election. But that's also probably what elevated Joe Biden, his acknowledgement of it. As I said earlier, they were supposed to be taking COVID tests here at this particular ceremony. One more thing to bring up Donald Trump, I suppose he's on his way out here in just moments away. But I talked to a gift shop owner who said that they stopped selling Trump merchandise a couple days ago, even though there were some people who were looking for them apparently yesterday. And when I asked why, she very curtly told me, well, his tenure is ending. So there's a lot of feeling around here that this is the end of one somewhat bizarre era, I suppose, for a lot of folks, and the beginning of a new one. And we'll have to see how it goes.
I'd like to bring in Ray here briefly, because now this, what we're listening to, what you can see here on your screens, this is Reverend Leo Donovan, and he's delivering an invocation here. Faith is obviously very important to Joe Biden, and in fact he's only the second Catholic president the United States has ever had.
the first Catholic president of the United States since the death of John F. Kennedy, who was the first. And, you know, it is an interesting moment in the history of Catholics in the United States. They're the largest single religious group in this country. At about 75 million people, more than 1 in 5 Americans is a Roman Catholic. But for much of the early history of this country, they were excluded. They were shunned from national politics. It goes to show, I mean, the country was almost 200 years old before we had a Roman Catholic president. Joe Biden has steered a very interesting course. Publicly, openly Catholic, putting grace notes and signals of prayers and Bible verses in his public speeches and in his remarks and interviews with reporters, but not embracing in the public way that the Republican Party has made the hallmark of American politics over the last 60 years, a full-on embrace of evangelical Christianity in a public and sometimes exclusive kind of way. Joe Biden has tried to find a way to continue to practice his private faith, to make very clear that it's part of who he is and part of his self-definition, while not going in the direction that a lot of his opponents across the aisle have over the years, including Donald Trump, who, after all, was one of the publicly least religious presidents in modern American life. So Catholicism, very important to Joe Biden and the Biden family. He's a regular Mass attender and someone who knows his scripture and his Catholic missal very well. Isabel?
Interesting you should say that, Ray. So we see a Joe Biden who is openly Catholic, as you say, but discreetly so in some respects if we look at his counterparts in the Republican Party. And that is a measure of the man in some respects, isn't it? Because I think Joe Biden's discretion, his ability to reach across the aisle, that's something that has stood out for many people as his time as a politician, his long time serving as a politician in the United States. He's quite a consensual person.
Part of the Joe Biden story for American adults is to watch him navigate his adult life in the shadow of tragedy. A lot of people were reminded during his time as a candidate that he lost his first wife and one of his children in a terrible car accident right on the cusp of one of the happiest days of his life, taking office as a United States Senator, the youngest senator in the United States. Right on the verge of this triumph, he loses his wife, he loses his child, his 2 remaining sons are seriously injured, and at that point, Joe Biden had to figure out what the rest of his life was going to be like. He made his young family a promise that he wouldn't be the kind of senator who was absent, that he would be home every night from work. Luckily, Delaware is pretty close and just a short train ride away. After the Senate's deliberations, every day he would get on the train and head back to Delaware. He said, I'm going to try to be there every night to kiss you boys goodnight. And he was an active father, publicly known and seen on the trains. They called him Amtrak Joe after our national rail system here. But not only that tragedy, but then the death of his son, who was in many ways considered to be the heir to the Biden mantle. Beau Biden was a statewide politician in his home state of Delaware and someone thought to have a very big and promising political future. He served overseas during America's wars in the Middle East. He was widely respected and a peer to Kamala Harris as one of the attorneys general of the United States. So when Beau Biden died very young of cancer,
I just want to interrupt you
Joe
1
Biden's
second. Let me just interrupt you for one moment there. We will be talking about Joe Biden's life throughout today, but we're just seeing now a celebrity, Lady Gaga, and she is going to sing the national anthem. So this is star-studded event. Lady Gaga, a long-time supporter of Joe Biden.
So proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Saved us that star-spangled banner yet waved on the land of the free and the
So Lady Gaga there, a long-time supporter of Joe Biden. And in just a few moments now, we're going to hear Andrea Hall, and she's going to lead the Pledge of Allegiance. So let's just listen into the sound. We're seeing Lady Gaga leave. We'll also be hearing some music from J-Lo, Jennifer Lopez, later on during the ceremony.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome from the City of South Fulton, Georgia Fire and Rescue Department, President of the International Association of Firefighters, Local 3920, Fire Captain Andrea M. Hall, for the reciting of the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
That was Georgia Fire Captain Andrea Hall leading the Pledge of Allegiance there.
What you are all about to be part of, America, is a historic moment of firsts. To administer the oath to our first African American, our first Asian American, and our first woman Vice President, Kamala Harris, it is my great privilege to welcome to the inaugural stage the first Latina to ever serve on the Supreme Court of the United States of America, Justice Sonia Sotomayor.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for the oath of office, followed by musical honors.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear.
I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I take this obligation freely.
That I take this obligation freely.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
That I will well and faithfully discharge.
That I will well and faithfully discharge.
The duties of the office on which I am about to enter.
The duties of the office upon which I am about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Kamala Harris there, embraced by her husband and taking the oath of office. I, Kamala Daly Harris, solemnly swear. She started with those words. She is now the Vice President of the United States, and as she said those words, she made history. She made history, as Amy Klobuchar mentioned, because not only is she the first female Vice President, and we're going to say it again and again today, she is the first Vice President of the United States who is of African and also of Asian origin, origins that have marked her life. What follows now is a musical interlude.
Please welcome Jennifer Lopez to perform This Land Is Your Land and America the Beautiful, accompanied by members of the President's Own United States Marine Band.
This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Islands.
So that is Jennifer Lopez. We also had Lady Gaga singing, and we just saw a few moments ago the pictures there of the empty mall ahead of Capitol Hill that would have previously been full of spectators, empty now because of COVID-19. It is quite an event, quite a moving day, I'd say, for the United States and for all of us watching this. And I'm joined by Aurore Portet, who is from Sciences Po, expert in American politics. What have you made, Aurore, of what we've seen today? I have to say I'm really quite moved by today's events.
Well, it was quite emotional, right? I think we can see that women are front and center in this inauguration. We're having artists like Lady Gaga and Jennifer Lopez, but also Sonia Mayer Sotomayor. This is amazing. They're very represented in this inauguration. So I think this is a strong symbol here. And we're seeing quite a star-studded inauguration, even though this is not the usual celebration where you have a big party and you have lots of people present on the mall. Unfortunately, for COVID reasons, but also for security reasons, this was not possible. But I think Joe Biden has been able to deliver the party and to deliver the emotion. I think we've seen plenty of that. And this is what he pledged on, right, since the event of COVID, is being able to deliver both a campaign and an inauguration that would be, on television or on a computer screen, but still represent his philosophy and be an amazing moment for the American people.
It really is an amazing moment, and after Jennifer Lopez will come the moment many of us have been waiting for, and that will be when Joe Biden takes that oath of office. We've seen Kamala Harris take the oath of office. Joe Biden will then make an inaugural speech. Now, we'll be taking all of that live, but if you're just joining us now, we're watching Jennifer Lopez perform here on Capitol Hill. I'm joined by Aurore Portet, and Aurore, if we compare this to Donald Trump's inauguration, it's quite a different event, isn't it, really?
Well, if you look at social media, Trump supporters are now currently making fun of the size of the crowd of the Joe Biden ceremony, but obviously this is a non-issue. I mean, definitely Joe Biden was very clear from the start that there would not be, a crowd present because it would not be safe, right? So this is one of the major differences. But also, I think in terms of representation, as we said, women, minorities, and it is a very different ceremony as well because the president, the current president, until 15 minutes now, so Donald Trump is still president of the United States, is not present. And there has not been this transition of power, which makes the presidency quite weak at the moment, right? So this is, I think, two of the major differences here.
Some major differences indeed. Let's just listen in here for a moment because we're seeing Chief Justice John Roberts, and he is the person who's going to be administering the presidential oath of office with Joe Biden. Joe Biden there, being joined there by his wife. Now, let's just listen into this moment.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Joseph Robinette Biden, Jr., do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden, Jr., do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
Office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability.
Will, to the best of my ability.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
Preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated.
So we're just waiting now for Joe Biden, President Joe Biden, to make his inaugural address. He has just been sworn in as President of the United States. Kamala Harris, you can see there, has been sworn in as his Vice President. Joe Biden expected any moment now to make that important address to the people of the United States. Congratulations has been pouring in just in the last few moments from now, from around the world, from leaders in Europe, Boris Johnson, who says he's looking forward to working with President Biden. We're also hearing and seeing that Sebastian Kurz, who's the Austrian Chancellor, has also been sending in his praise and welcoming the new president.
It is now my great privilege and high honor to be the first person to officially introduce the 46th President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden, Jr.
Chief Justice Roberts, Vice President Harris, Speaker Pelosi, Leader Schumer, Leader McConnell, Vice President Pence, and my distinguished guests, my fellow Americans. This is America's day. This is democracy's day, a day of history and hope, of renewal and resolve. Through a crucible for the ages, America has been tested anew, and America has risen to the challenge. Today, we celebrate the triumph not of a candidate, but of a cause, the cause of democracy. The people, the will of the people has been heard, and the will of the people has been heeded. We've learned again that democracy is precious. Democracy is fragile. And at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed. So now, on this hallowed ground where just a few days ago, violence sought to shake the Capitol's very foundation, we come together as one nation, under God, indivisible, to carry out the peaceful transfer of power as we have for more than 2 centuries. As we look ahead in our uniquely American way, restless, bold, optimistic, and set our sights on the nation we know we can be and we must be. I thank my predecessors of both parties for their presence here today. I thank them from the bottom of my heart. And I know the resilience of our Constitution and the strength of our nation, as does President Carter, who I spoke with last night, who cannot be with us today, but whom we salute for his lifetime in service. I've just taken the sacred oath each of those patriots have taken, the oath first sworn by George Washington. But the American story depends not on any one of us, not on some of us, but on all of us, on we, the people, who seek a more perfect union. This is a great nation. We are good people. And over the centuries, through storm and strife, in peace and in war, we've come so far. But we still have far to go. We'll press forward with speed and urgency, for we have much to do in this winter of peril and significant possibilities. Much to repair, much to restore, much to heal, much to build, and much to gain. Few people in our nation's history have been more challenged or found a time more challenging or difficult than the time we're in now. Once-in-a-century virus that silently stalks the country has taken as many lives in 1 year as America lost in all of World War II. Millions of jobs have been lost. Hundreds of thousands of businesses closed. A cry for racial justice, some 400 years in the making, moves us. The dream of justice for all will be deferred no longer. A cry for survival comes from the planet itself, a cry that can't be any more desperate or any more clear. And now, a rise of political extremism, white supremacy, domestic terrorism, that we must confront and we will defeat. To overcome these challenges, to restore the soul and secure the future of America, requires so much more than words. It requires the most elusive of all things in a democracy: unity. Unity. In another January, on New Year's Day in 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. When he put pen to paper, the president said, and I quote, If my name ever goes down into history, it'll be for this act, and my whole soul is in it. My whole soul is in it. Today, on this January day, my whole soul is in this, bringing America together, uniting our people, uniting our nation. And I ask every American to join me in this cause. Uniting to fight the foes we face: anger, resentment and hatred, extremism, lawlessness, violence, disease, joblessness, and hopelessness. With unity, we can do great things, important things. We can right wrongs. We can put people to work in good jobs. We can teach our children in safe schools. We can overcome the deadly virus. We can reward work and rebuild the middle class and make health care secure for all. We can deliver racial justice, and we can make America once again the leading force for good in the world. I know speaking of unity can sound to some like a foolish fantasy these days. I know the forces that divide us are deep and they are real. But I also know they are not new. Our history has been a constant struggle between the American ideal that we're all are created equal and the harsh, ugly reality that racism, nativism, fear, demonization have long torn us apart. The battle is perennial, and victory is never assured. Through Civil War, the Great Depression, World War, 9/11, through struggle, sacrifice, and setbacks, our better angels have always prevailed. In each of these moments, enough of us have come together to carry all of us forward. And we can do that now. History, faith, and reason show the way of unity. We can see each other not as adversaries, but as neighbors. We can treat each other with dignity and respect. We can join forces, stop the shouting, and lower the temperature. For without unity, there is no peace, only bitterness and fury. No progress, only exhausting outrage. No nation, only a state of chaos. This is our historic moment of crisis and challenge. And unity is the path forward. And we must meet this moment as the United States of America. If we do that, I guarantee you we will not fail. We have never, ever, ever, ever failed in America when we've acted together. And so today, at this time, in this place, let's start afresh, all of us. Let's begin to listen to one another again, hear one another, see one another, show respect to one another. Politics doesn't have to be a raging fire, destroying everything in its path. Every disagreement doesn't have to be a cause for total war. And we must reject the culture in which facts themselves are manipulated and even manufactured. My fellow Americans, we have to be different than this. America has to be better than this. And I believe America is so much better than this. Just look around. Here we stand in the shadow of the Capitol Dome, as was mentioned earlier, completed amid the Civil War, when the Union itself was literally hanging in the balance. Yet we endured. We prevailed. Here we stand, looking out on the great mall where Dr. King spoke of his dream. Here we stand where 108 years ago, at another inaugural, thousands of protesters tried to block brave women marching for the right to vote. And today, we mark the swearing in of the first woman in American history elected to national office, Vice President Kamala Harris. Don't tell me things can't change. Here we stand, across the Potomac from Arlington Cemetery, where heroes who gave the last full measure of devotion rest in eternal peace. And here we stand, just days after a riotous mob thought they could use violence to silence the will of the people, to stop the work of our democracy, to drive us from this sacred ground. It did not happen. It will never happen. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Not ever. To all those who supported our campaign, I'm humbled by the faith you've placed in us. To all those who did not support us, let me say this. Hear me out as we move forward. Take a measure of me and my heart. And if you still disagree, so be it. That's democracy. That's America. The right to dissent peaceably within the guardrails of our republic is perhaps this nation's greatest strength. Yet hear me clearly. Disagreement must not lead to disunion. And I pledge this to you. I will be a president for all Americans. All Americans. And I promise you, I will fight as hard for those who did not support me as for those who did. Many centuries ago, St. Augustine, a saint of my church, wrote that a people was a multitude defined by the common objects of their love. Defined by the common objects of their love. What are the common objects we as Americans love that define us as Americans? I think we know. Opportunity, security, liberty, dignity, respect, honor, and yes, the truth. Recent weeks and months have taught us a painful lesson. There is truth and there are lies. Lies told for power and for profit. And each of us has a duty and a responsibility as citizens, as Americans, and especially as leaders. Leaders who have pledged to honor our Constitution and protect our nation, to defend the truth and defeat the lies. Look, I understand that many of my fellow Americans view the future with fear and trepidation. I understand they worry about their jobs. I understand, like my dad, they lay in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering, can I keep my health care? Can I pay my mortgage? Thinking about their families, about what comes next. I promise you, I get it. But the answer is not to turn inward, to retreat into competing factions, distrusting those who don't look like you, or worship the way you do, or don't get their news from the same sources you do. We must end this uncivil war that pits red against blue, rural versus urban, conservative versus liberal. We can do this if we open our souls instead of hardening our hearts, if we show a little tolerance and humility, and if we're willing to stand in the other person's shoes, as my mom would say, just for a moment, stand in their shoes. Because here's the thing about life. There's no accounting for what fate will deal you. Some days, when you need a hand. There are other days when we're called to lend a hand. That's how it has to be. That's what we do for one another. And if we are this way, our country will be stronger, more prosperous, more ready for the future. And we can still disagree. My fellow Americans, in the work ahead of us, we're going to need each other. We need all our strength to persevere through this dark winter. We're entering what may be the toughest and deadliest period of the virus. We must set aside politics and finally face this pandemic as one nation. One nation. And I promise you this, as the Bible says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. We will get through this together. Together. Look, folks, all my colleagues I serve with in the House and the Senate up here, we all understand the world is watching all of us today. So here's my message to those beyond our borders. America has been tested, and we've come out stronger for it. We will repair our alliances and engage with the world once again, not to meet yesterday's challenges, but today's and tomorrow's challenges. And we'll lead not merely by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. We'll be a strong and trusted partner for peace, progress, and security. Look, you all know we've been through so much in this nation. And in my first act as president, I'd like to ask you to join me in a moment of silent prayer. Remember all of those who we lost in this past year to the pandemic. Those 400,000 fellow Americans, moms, dads, husbands, wives, sons, daughters, friends, neighbors, and coworkers. We'll honor them by becoming the people and the nation we know we can and should be. So I ask you, let's say a silent prayer for those who've lost their lives and those left behind, and for our country. Amen. Folks, this is a time of testing. We face an attack on our democracy and on truth, a raging virus, growing inequity, the sting of systemic racism, a climate in crisis, America's role in the world. Any one of these would be enough to challenge us in profound ways. But the fact is, we face them all at once, presenting this nation with one of the gravest responsibilities we've had. Now we're going to be tested. Are we going to step up, all of us? It's time for boldness, for there's so much to do. And this is certain. I promise you, we will be judged, you and I, by how we resolve these cascading crises of our era. We will rise to the occasion is the question. Will we master this rare and difficult hour? Will we meet our obligations and pass along a new and better world to our children? I believe we must. I'm sure you do as well. I believe we will. And when we do, we'll write the next great chapter in the history of the United States of America, the American story. A story that might sound something like a song that means a lot to me. It's called American Anthem. There's one verse that stands out, at least for me, and it goes like this. The work and prayers of century have brought us to this day. What shall be our legacy? What will our children say? Let me know in my heart when my days are through. America, America, I gave my best to you. Let's us add our own work and prayers to the unfolding story of our great nation. If we do this, then when our days are through, our children and our children's children will say of us, they gave their best, they did their duty, they healed a broken land. My fellow Americans, I close the day where I began, with the sacred oath. Before God and all of you, I give you my word. I will always level with you. I will defend the Constitution. I'll defend our democracy. I'll defend America. and will give all of you, keep everything I do in your service, thinking not of power, but of possibilities, not of personal interest, but the public good. And together we shall write an American story of hope, not fear, of unity, not division, of light, not darkness, a story of decency and dignity, love and healing, greatness and goodness. May this be the story that guides us, the story that inspires us, and the story that tells ages yet to come that we answered the call of history. We met the moment. Democracy and hope, truth and justice did not die on our watch but thrived. That America secured liberty at home and stood once again as a beacon to the world. That is what we owe our forebears, one another, and generation to follow. So, with purpose and resolve, we turn to those tasks of our time, sustained by faith, driven by conviction, and devoted to one another and the country we love with all our hearts. May God bless America, and may God protect our troops. Thank you, America.
Okay, a very stirring inauguration speech there from now President Joe Biden, the 46th President of the United States. And I think if there was one word that came back again and again, it was the word unity. Also, calling for democracy to prevail. He said this wasn't the triumph of one candidate, but the triumph of democracy. And he called for one nation and a peaceful transfer of power. Now, each speaker today has referred to those riots on Capitol Hill. And here again, we heard the calls for unity, for democracy to prevail. Joe Biden, they're reminding the US people that we are good people, but saying we still have far to go, much to heal, but yet much to gain. But he didn't shy away from all the challenges that the US faces. He said that there was a real cry from the planet. Joe Biden there already saying that he's going to sign those Paris climate accords, one of his first acts as president. But he also called out political extremism. He mentioned Abraham Lincoln, referring to Abraham Lincoln, but also Martin Luther King, as he called for dignity and respect and for the temperature of US politics to be lowered. He said there's no progress without peace. He reminded Americans this is our historic moment, the moment of the United States of America, with calls to start afresh. Now, we have a team of reporters in the US, in Washington, listening into this speech. I'd like to bring in Ray Suarez. Ray Suarez, who is outside the US Capitol. Ray, tell us, what did you make of Joe Biden's speech there, his inaugural address?
It was fascinating. He didn't spare one challenge. I mean, he really loaded up the cart with what he's got to pull over the next 4 years. And then at the same time, the speech is almost like he opened up his head and opened up his heart, and out came Joe Biden. Look at the words that he used. He talked about ending the divisions. He talked about finding common ground. He talked about compromise. He talked about ending the wars on Capitol Hill. This is kind of who he is and what his brand has been in American politics for 4 decades. When he came as a young senator to Capitol Hill, there was a whole different spirit in the United States Senate. Senators got along across party lines. He's a throwback to that age, and we heard that age of trying to work together to achieve common goals again and again and again throughout this speech, at the same time as he stressed just how challenging this moment is. there isn't a John F. Kennedy, ask not what your country can do for you kind of moment that'll ring down the ages. But the essential decency, the essential idea of who Joe Biden is and has been throughout his political career rang through loud and clear in this speech. Isabel?
Absolutely, Ray. And what did you make, really, of this call for unity? How do you think this is going to resonate with the US population, a population that is as divided as ever? Is this what the US wants to hear?
A large majority of Republicans say that Joe Biden did not win his office fair and square. So that call for unity isn't just a grace note, a kind of nice thing to say when you become president of the United States. It's going to be one of the essential tasks moving forward because, as the new president mentioned, he's got some terrible, terrible challenges ahead. And if he has a Congress that's trying to work against him, trying to hobble him, trying to stop his agenda, it's going to be tough sledding these next couple of months. Already we're seeing some of the hardest line Republicans announce their opposition to some of Biden's cabinet picks. They will prevail, but they're likely to prevail with a lot more opposition than the new president would have preferred. So the call for unity is more of a hope and an ideal than a reality right now in a deeply divided national legislature that you see behind me, but also a deeply divided country.
Thanks so much, Ray. Now, Andy Rosejen is also standing out there on the US Capitol. Andy, I know you've been speaking to people who have gathered, the few people who have been able to gather. Just a quick pause, though, before I bring you in, because this is the National Poet Laureate here who is about to recite a poem. Maybe we should just listen into that just for 1 second.
We ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet.
So this is 22-year-old Amanda Gorman, who is the national youth poet.
Isn't always just is. And yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true. That even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promised glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare it, because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith we trust, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared it at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So, while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. But one thing is certain: if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. With every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the West. We will rise from the wind-swept Northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade of flame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it. For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
So that was Amanda Gorman, 22-year-old national youth poet. Now, she wrote this poem, The Hill We Climb, just for this occasion, specifically for Joe Biden's inauguration. She shared how difficult the task was, and she really shares this role with just a very small group of poets who've marked an inauguration, a presidential inauguration, and she is the youngest one to ever have done so. So now, Andy Rosegen, who is in Washington, D.C. Now, he's been following all these events. Andy, let's just go back now, if you will, to Joe Biden's speech. Now, his speech, as we said, was one of unity. Now, Ray was saying to us a few moments ago, this is who Joe Biden is, somebody who tries to work across the aisle, a throwback to trying to work together. But if we bring in the people you've been speaking to today, do they want to work together? Is this a U.S. that wants to unite, from your experience on the ground, to those people that you've spoken to?
Well, the folks out here that have been watching and listening to all this certainly hope so. In fact, there was a cheer that went up when Joe Biden officially was sworn in as president. Small group out here. But, you know, I just talked to a young man named Kevin from Houston who made the trip up here all this way. He's wearing a Biden-Harris jacket. But he told me that now comes the hard part. He wants to see the Biden-Harris administration move forward on keeping promises that they've made, unifying the country. The real hard part begins. It reminded me of a young man who I interviewed the moment that Joe Biden was declared the winner back in November. He said he was a progressive, and he wanted the Joe Biden administration to be even more progressive on issues like the homeless and taking care of the homeless. So that's kind of the theme you're getting out here. There's a lot of people who say that they were just worn out by 4 years under Donald Trump and just limped to the finish line here. Now they're hoping that somehow Joe Biden can somehow overturn what went on the last 4 years. You heard that theme. In fact, it struck me that Joe Biden right away talked about the riot last couple of weeks ago now. Senator Amy Klobuchar, who introduced him, also talked about that. They didn't shy away from that, and they used that riot as a metaphor for the whole last 4 years. And that's really, I think, the feeling that you're getting from folks out here, Isabel.
Thanks, thanks, Andy. Ray, actually, I'll just bring you in quickly because I just want to pick up on something that Andy just said, and it's something we noted a few moments ago. That it's interesting, really, isn't it, that no one has shied away from those riots on Capitol Hill, a moment that was seen as a moment of national shame for the United States, but has been brought up again and again at this inauguration.
Well, I think we're still coming to terms with just what a shocking event it was and how deeply it moved people. Both people who were at home in their living rooms watching it from their couch and people who were here in the national capital and realized the enormity of what was going on. But also, over time, both as arrests are being made and as people consider what the outgoing president, the just departed Donald Trump, said during the 2 months between the election and early January, whipping people up, hyping up the rhetoric, hyping up the level of conflict. It's now dawning on a lot of people that his fingerprints may not have been directly on that assault on the Capitol, but many of the people who were inspired to go into that building that day told officers who were trying to turn them back they were there at the invitation of the president. So we're still digesting this. It's still, we're still coming to terms with what that meant. Americans think that kind of thing happens in other places in the world, not here.
Thanks so much, Ray. We'll be coming back to you throughout this ceremony, but I'd like now to bring in Aurore Portet, who is an expert in US politics from Sciences Po. Now, interestingly, Biden didn't shy away from the violence on Capitol Hill, and he hasn't shied away from the multiple challenges that he evoked that are hitting the US at the same time. He comes with a very, very difficult to-do list, doesn't he? Or where's he going to start?
He does, right. What I thought was interesting was that he took those challenges head on and he said we need to be able to overcome them, and he put them into historical perspective because, I mean, the US has been through a lot, and it has been through division, it has been through a civil war, so he was able to put that into perspective. He was also able, in a way, to give us an idea of some of the personal challenges he's faced, and I hear for an anecdote, the poet that just spoke, Amanda Gorman, she had a speech impediment as a child, and Biden had a stutter, right? And this is one of the reasons that she was drawn to poetry. And I think what we're seeing today is Biden finding his voice as a president, and it has been, I have to say, quite a positive and energizing speech that he delivered, despite, I mean, the dark times that Washington is going through, the COVID, the pandemic crisis, the insurrection, and he's delivering a very positive message, right? Now, this inaugural speech traditionally usually gives us both an idea of what's to come in terms of the philosophy of the administration, but it's also an announcement of policies. And here he's managed to address the COVID-19 crisis, the immigration question, healthcare, racial justice, the climate issue, and this is the list of his top priorities for the next 100 days. He's going to definitely bring in some action on that, both through executive orders and the plan that he has in Congress. Just to name a few, for climate, he will rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement, and one of his first tasks in office will be to revoke some of the Biden decisions on climate, like revoking the permit for the Keystone XL pipeline, but also give some moratoriums on oil and gas leasings, and he will reverse more than 100 actions Trump took in office in the first 100 days of his presidency. So that's what he announced: change, right, and overcoming challenges.
And quite a historic change at that, isn't it? Overturning what a former president has done to such a degree. And what's interesting, Aurore, and I'm going to bring in Matthew from the Cube in just one moment, what is really interesting is the messages that have been coming from around the world welcoming Joe Biden as the 46th president. There's been a lot of reaction on social media. So, Matthew, what have you been seeing?
Well, Isabel, it's official. As we've been hearing all afternoon, Joe Biden has been elected the 46th President of the United States. Official after the swearing of the ceremony, and also official on social media. If you go onto Twitter and look up the official account for the President of the United States, you can see that it is now labelled as Joseph Biden. President Biden, the same for Kamala Harris, Vice President, as well as the First Lady Jill Biden, and indeed the White House. All of those accounts have now been changed, as those of the Trump administration have been publicly archived. You can still access them on Twitter, but now, as you can see on social media, as we've been seeing in Washington, D.C., officially, Joe Biden elected 46th President of the United States. This on Twitter and as well on Facebook. Joe Biden yet to tweet publicly for the first time as the 46th President, but Kamala Harris has done so in a simple three-worded tweet on social media. Kamala Harris saying that she is ready to serve. We also heard from A.B. Klobuchar, the senator who was speaking at the ceremony, really emphasising the importance of Kamala Harris as well, saying here that it's the first African-American, Asian-American and woman to become vice president. Sworn in by Justice Sonia Sotomayor, it is, as she says, what breaking the glass ceiling looks like. Really tremendous reaction from across the United States, Republicans and Democrats alike. But also a lot of reaction from here in Europe, and that includes a lot of European leaders, the likes of the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who has a very interestingly worded tweet here on social media, saying thank you to Joe Biden for his inspiring inaugural address and for the offer to cooperate. But an interesting word as well here used, that Europe is ready for a fresh start. One of the first people to congratulate Joe Biden and Kamala Harris was the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who on Twitter echoed a similar message, saying that America's leadership is vital on the issues that matter not just to the US and the United Kingdom, but also to the world, the likes of the COVID-19 pandemic and climate change, issues that we heard Joe Biden address in his inaugural speech. Somebody else who responded on social media was the Irish Taoiseach Micheál Martin. Of course, a lot of reaction to Joe Biden's Irish heritage, and Micheál Martin saying, just like Boris Johnson and other European leaders, that the speech was a day of history and of hope, and that he looks forward to forging ever closer ties with the Joe Biden administration. And on a final note, Isabel, the European Council President Charles Michel has released a video on Twitter in which he echoes a lot of those sentiments that world leaders have been saying, that it's time to bring back conviction and common sense to rejuvenate the relationship between the European Union and the United States. So congratulations pouring in across social media from world leaders, and the official Twitter accounts and social media accounts have now been changed to show that Joe Biden is indeed the 46th President of the United States.
Thanks so much, Matt. So there's messages of congratulations pouring in from around the world. Well, we can cross now to the former Director of Global Engagement at the White House and World Affairs columnist Brett Bruin. Hello there. Many thanks for joining us on the programme. Quite honestly, at some points I had goosebumps during that ceremony, particularly when there was the issue of diversity was brought up again and again, and we saw the diverse cast of people who were involved. I just wanted your first take on this inauguration, and guess what did you make of Joe Biden's speech?
It felt like an inflection point. I mean, we are weary and we are certainly weakened after 4 years of Trump's tumultuous presidency. And what we heard in just the last few minutes was so remarkably different. What we saw was so remarkably different than the images, than the individuals who have been paraded out at the White House and as national figures under the Trump administration. So it does feel as though we are starting a new chapter. However, there is a lot of uncertainty, and there remains a good deal of concern here in Washington. I think President Biden's appeal to the American people, his appeal to both parties to lay down their weapons, to listen more, and to find common ground is certainly encouraging. But I would also remind the audience, we heard similar words for the president that I worked for, and he did extend a hand, an olive branch to Republicans. And it was met with a whole lot of obstructionism. It was met with a lot of walls and an unwillingness to engage. It will be interesting in the coming days what happens as Republican leaders enter the minority in Congress, and yet it's still a very slim minority. We've already seen, as Ray Suarez pointed out, examples like Senator Josh Hawley, who are blocking nominations to key posts. It doesn't signal that we are ready on both sides of the aisle to turn the page.
So an inflection point, but you're seeing maybe a Republican Party that's not willing to turn the page. And what could make matters even more complex, Brett, I guess, is this impeachment, the second impeachment stage, which is going to take place in the Senate. Do you think that could actually create even further, deeper divisions within the Republican Party, but also greater opposition to Joe Biden himself?
Impeachment offers a path to some Republicans, like Senator Mitch McConnell, who now becomes the minority leader, to disavow both the actions of President Trump on January 6th, but also to redefine their party. And I think it's important for an international audience to understand that the Republican Party, while it has been quite loyal to President Trump, only represents about 35% of the American population. And because of the way that we distribute electoral votes, they have won elections in recent years, whether it was George W. Bush or more recently Donald Trump. And yet that percentage, as we saw in November, has been steadily declining. They have to redefine who they are. They have to make a choice as to whether or not they're going to hang on to the politics of division, the politics of populism of Donald Trump, or they are going to chart a new course. And this impeachment vote is a moment where that decision will be laid bare. And I think it will be instructive to see how many Republicans, not just Senator Mitt Romney, not perhaps just Senator Mitch McConnell, but are there Republicans from some of those states which themselves will be facing re-election in just 2 years' time, who decide it is time to let the politics of Trump go.
And it's interesting because as you were talking, I was just looking at the pictures, the live pictures there of the ceremony. Some people are, leaving now. We can see Mike Pence leaving, but he has notably attended this ceremony. Now, you served with Barack Obama, under Barack Obama, who's the first U.S. Black American president. Joe Biden, though, is different in some respects. Not only is he a white president, but he also has a history of trying to reach across the aisle. Do you not think that maybe his years of experience might give him something different, might allow him to reach parts of the Republican Party that Barack Obama didn't?
It's a very important point, because while President Obama had a soaring oratory, one of the frustrations, quite frankly, as a White House staffer working with him, was that whether with world leaders or political leaders here in the United States, his relations were not always so warm. He didn't invest the time in the way that Joe Biden did. As was mentioned earlier in the program, Biden would continue to work out at the Senate gym. He would spend the time with both Democrats and Republicans, and he has decades of experience with them and trust, credibility. That will certainly help, but there are as well going to be political wins and headwinds that he will have to confront. And yet, if you listen to his speech today, and I actually sat in the White House next to his chief foreign policy speechwriter now, and I heard a lot of the typical Joe Biden-isms, the everyday speak. And that is an important distinction as well from his predecessor, who you now see on the screen, Barack Obama. He speaks in a way that resonates with middle America, that resonates with folks who voted for Donald Trump. And I think we're going to continue to see more of that. It was interesting, just in the last few days, there was a report that Joe Biden has been tearing up some of the statements that have been arriving on his desk saying, I don't want policy speak. I want speak that average Americans can understand and can get behind.
That's really interesting. You should say that and that comparison with Barack Obama, because Joe Biden, as we've been emphasizing and he's emphasized, is inheriting a very different country to the one Barack Obama presided over. So if you see the US, you take a look at the US as a whole, what do you think have to be the top 3 priorities, let's say, of Joe Biden as he handles these multiple crises that he evoked?
Well, I unfortunately would say the first one is domestic terrorism. It wasn't in their plans, but the events of January 6th, and I worry that in the coming days we will see more violence, more attacks. The inauguration itself, the city of Washington was secured, but there are state capitals, there are lots of other softer targets around the country, and there is still a lot of anger. There's still a lot of chatter amongst extremist groups. That has to be dealt with. It is a clear and present danger to the stability of our country. The second, obviously, is COVID. We hit just in the last couple of days a grim milestone of 400,000 Americans who have perished. And that number continues to rise on a daily basis. Biden immediately has to come in and try to get a hold of it. We've had problems here in the U.S. with vaccine distribution. And the hands-off policy of the Trump administration, the laissez-faire approach, just hasn't worked. And lastly, on that top 3 is the economy. We have new job numbers that are worrying. The small businesses particularly have been hit hard by this open and then shut again approach to the economy, the lack of a strategy, the lack of support. What Congress passed in just the last month is insufficient for many small businesses to get by over the next few months. So Biden has laid out a $1.9 trillion aid package, which would be important both for Americans that are unemployed as well as the American economy.
And it's interesting, Brett, when you cite those top 3 priorities, they're all domestic priorities, aren't they? You haven't even mentioned foreign policy. And Joe Biden said, OK, we need to recreate those alliances because he, again, is inheriting a US where those alliances are severely frayed.
Indeed. I would note that the inauguration address was very short on words to the world. There was obviously the comment that the world is watching, that America will emerge from this strengthened. I remain, just skeptical. I don't think that the United States returns to where we were, whether it was in 2016 or, for that matter, in 2000, when George W. Bush walked down those steps on the Capitol that you now see descending Vice President Harris and former Vice President Pence. But unfortunately, because of COVID, because of the threat of domestic terrorism and the economy, Biden just is not going to have the bandwidth to deal with global issues in the way that he will need to. And I have to also mention, he's not going to have the budget. We will not be able to compete with the likes of China, indeed with the European Union, because we have spent so much and will need to spend so much on domestic issues. So while Biden will speak in a certainly different way, he will act in a different way, the presence of the United States will not be felt in the way that it was before as a source of stability and security and standards around the world. We're just going to be too distracted with things at home for the time being.
So a very weakened United States on the world stage for years to come. Is that what you're seeing?
Indeed. And I talk about it as a post-American era. It did not start with Trump. We have been withdrawing steadily over several years, including the time that I spent in the White House with President Obama. I think you saw it, whether it was on Syria, on Iraq, the engagement where we said, well, we will help refugees who can escape ISIS, but it was a far cry from President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Four Freedoms message at the height of the Second World War, where we said anywhere that these fundamental freedoms are under threat, we will come to their defense. I think America now is essentially saying, we'll do our best, but it is still very much through a narrow lens. Joe Biden, he is an internationalist. He is someone who has deep relations overseas. He's just not going to have the time. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris, the vice president who you see there, is going to have to spend an awful lot of time in the building that you see behind her, because she is the decisive vote on so many of the legislative issues, because the Democrats only have a one-vote majority in the Senate.
Okay, so just briefly, let's just talk about Kamala Harris, because we've been talking just about Joe Biden and what he's got on his plate. Now that's just a seismic change for the US, isn't it? Having a vice president like Kamala Harris. How do you think that is going to go down with the US populace? Now, you say Joe Biden can speak to the people. Can Kamala Harris?
Well, Kamala Harris is remarkable in several respects. One, obviously, she is the first female to hold national office in the United States. You have Nancy Pelosi, who's the Speaker of the House, but that is a position just like parliamentarians in Europe that is elected on a local level and then in the Congress. So the fact that she now holds this office, that she has carried the banner of equality into the White House, into the Oval Office, is a symbolic one. I think it will usher in an era where there are more women, both in governorships as well as in legislative positions. And perhaps we will see 40 years from now, it could be Kamala Harris or another woman who is sworn into office. And I think there's a lot of speculation about what she may do, what Joe Biden may do after 4 years. So we will have to watch it closely. Nonetheless, there remains obviously a good deal of work to be done, whether it's on repairing some of the inequity that exists on gender issues in the U.S., or whether it has to do with issues related to racial divisions. And in all of that, I think you're going to see Kamala Harris play a central role. She obviously is someone who can also speak to a portion of the electorate that was critical for Joe Biden. I mean, if you look at the state of Georgia, if you look at the state of Pennsylvania, where Joe Biden won important victories, he did so because African Americans and particularly women turned out for him. So those voters are going to be essential in 2 years' time when we have legislative elections, and in 4 years' time when the Democrats are going to try to hold on to the White House.
Brett Bruin, absolutely fascinating talking to you. Thanks so much for giving us your time and your analysis there. So if you're just joining us, well, Joe Biden has now taken the oath of office, becoming the 46th president of the United States. In his inaugural speech, he delivered a strong rebuke of his predecessor, saying politics doesn't have to be a raging fire, destroying everything in its path. His central message was that of unity. He said that without it, there is only outrage and chaos. And Biden promised to repair America's alliances while engaging with the world once again. Well, later today, he's expected to sign 15 executive orders undoing many of Trump's actions on the environment, immigration, and the U.S. Census. He'll also make face masks mandatory in all federal buildings nationwide. Let's take another look at Biden taking the oath of office.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Joseph Robinette Biden, Jr., do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden, Jr., do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
Office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability.
Will, to the best of my ability.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Today we celebrate the triumph not of a candidate, but of a cause, the cause of democracy. The people, the will of the people has been heard, and the will of the people has been heeded. We've learned again that democracy is precious, democracy is fragile, and at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed.
Well, in between those performances, history was made when Kamala Harris was sworn in as the first female vice president of the United States. She's also the first Black and South Asian American person to become the nation's second in command. Here she was taking her oath of office.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear.
I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I take this obligation freely.
That I take this obligation freely.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
That I will well and faithfully discharge.
That I will well and faithfully discharge.
The duties of the office on which I am about to enter.
The duties of the office upon which I am about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Well, most European leaders seem to be letting out sighs of relief that Joe Biden is going to be the next US president. Well, earlier today, the president of the European Commission said the United States is back and Europe stands ready. Well, Joanna Gill reports on the hopes of politicians on this side of the Atlantic.
All eyes are on Washington with the inauguration of 46th US President Joe Biden. And the end of the Trump era is being greeted largely with relief by Brussels. Hopes, too, that both sides can now work together on climate change, COVID-19, trade and security.
Once again, after 4 long years, Europe has a friend in the White House. Europe is ready for a new start with our oldest and most trusted partner.
While the EU hopes the change in the White House will signal the opening of a new chapter in transatlantic relations, there were warnings too from MEPs that the last 4 years cannot simply be written off.
We're having a great meeting.
We have interests that are aligned, but not always identical. We need actions to overcome our differences, such as these unfair punitive taxes imposed by the US. And we cannot forget that Trump's presidency was not an accident.
Recent events on Capitol Hill shocked European leaders, and for some MEPs it was an opportunity for soul-searching.
Imagine that the riots to overturn a free and fair election would have happened here. Remember the Brexit campaign 5 years ago, filled with blatant lies and false promises. Think of the Polish government's unbelievable disregard for women's ownership of their own bodies. Don't forget Viktor Orban's systematic dismantling of Hungary's rule of law.
The proliferation of conspiracy theories online is one issue the Commission hopes to get Biden on board with, to make sure governments and parliaments call the shots and not Silicon Valley CEOs. Much now rests on the shoulders of the new president as both sides seek to heal the rifts at home and abroad. Joanna Gill, Euronews, Brussels.
And I'm joined now by our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who's been keeping an eye on all the political reaction here in Europe. Hello there to you, Darren. So we heard Joe Biden saying he's ready to repair alliances. The EU must be pretty glad to hear that message. But how far can a reset be on the cards?
Yeah, relief and I think a great deal of enthusiasm, it must be said, pretty much universally here in the European Union from leaders, at least when you look at Twitter and indeed emails that we've received over the last hour or so. Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commission President, who earlier on said this was a new dawn for US-EU relations, has tweeted saying thank you to Joe Biden for that inspiring inaugural address and for the offer to cooperate. She says that Europe is ready for a fresh start. Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, also taking to Twitter to say congratulations to Joe Biden on being sworn in. He says America's leadership is vital on issues that matter to us all, from climate change to COVID, and I look forward to working with President Biden. Also hearing from the Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, saying that all the successes and support of Spain in this era of hope and future will work with the USA for democracy and the reinforcement of more just, sustainable and inclusive global governance. The Italian Prime Minister, Giuseppe Conte, saying that this is a great day for democracy. Italy stands ready to face the challenges of a common international agenda together with the United States. Also hearing from the Irish Prime Minister, the Taoiseach, Micheál Martin. Of course, just remember that Joe Biden, you know what, over the last couple of months has paid quite a lot on the fact he's got Irish heritage, often referred to himself as an Irish American. Micheál Martin saying he believes that Ireland can be a bridge builder between the United States and the European Union. Isabel, as we all share common values in securing democracy, peace and economic development. I am enormously heartened, he goes on to say, that among the first actions and offers will be a recommitment of the US to the Paris Agreement on climate and a resettling of the relationship with Europe. And finally, also hearing in the last couple of minutes, actually, from the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban. Now, he was a big supporter, of course, wasn't he, of President Trump, very close ally of President Trump. Well, he has also offered his congratulations, perhaps unsurprisingly, to Joe Biden, saying that it is his pleasure to welcome this new relationship that has opened up what he calls new horizons in our bilateral relations in the field of security, energy policy and economy. And he goes on to say that I can assure that the Hungarian government remains fully committed to further fostering Hungarian-US relations on the basis of mutual respect and goodwill, on building our alliance in NATO, our commitment to counter-terrorism, and on our common aspiration in securing alternative energy resources for Central Europe. So lots of leaders latching on to lots of different issues, hoping clearly to build those relationships with the White House and with Washington. I think many, as I say, pretty relieved and hoping that this will be a reset on the relationship and somewhat maybe of a familiar relationship that, you know, used to exist between the European Union and the United States.
Yeah, that's right, Darren. But as you say the word reset, you can't help but wonder, can it really be a reset? Because there's been a lot of water under the bridge, hasn't there, since Donald Trump took the presidency. Brett Bruen evoked it himself. The US isn't going to be in the same position as it was. It's got a lot of domestic fires to put out. So how do you see this new relationship evolving, this new chapter between the EU and the US?
Well, it's really interesting, isn't it, that under President Trump we heard time and time again from many European politicians saying that this was the moment in which Europe needed to step up to the mark, to step out of America's shadow, that it needed to provide its own security, that it needed to take more of a presence, essentially, on the world stage. It needed strategic autonomy, as they say here in Brussels, Isabel, which essentially translates into, you know, Europe needs to represent itself better and not just rely on the United States. Now, clearly, with this new president, with President Biden, there is a sense that on many of the key issues, Brussels and Washington are yet again in the same place, on the same page, whether that is on the Paris Climate Accord, whether it is on dealing with Iran, whether it is potentially on dealing with things like big tech and how to deal with the COVID pandemic. There is an awful lot of agreement. That's not to say, though, they do agree on everything. Clearly, there are differences on how to approach China, for example. There are differences even within the European Union itself. It's pretty clear, I think, that the Biden White House is going to carry on a pretty aggressive tone towards Beijing. That is not a view shared, for example, in places like Berlin. And there will be disagreements, I assume, on American tech companies to come, potentially on trade as well. This is not necessarily going to be a relationship over the next 4 years that's going to go swimmingly. There, of course, will be disagreements. And I think maybe for people like Charles Michel and Emmanuel Macron and other EU leaders that actually, irrespective now of who the US president is, there is a feeling here in Brussels that they do need to essentially step out of America's shadow. They do need to start making decisions on their own. And as one of your most recent guests suggested, with the United States still potentially being pretty inward-looking, given all the challenges they're facing internally, that Joe Biden might not have that much time to focus on international relations, and that essentially that essence and strive to reach that that kind of distinct autonomy away from the United States will still continue in the years to come.
Very interesting that, Darren. And what about in terms of trade? Because as America has been looking more inwardly, the EU has been looking to other partners and sealing some pretty major trade deals. Do you remember back in the day we used to talk about the TTIP trade deal with the US? Do you think something like that might be back on the agenda? Or do you think those things are going to be on the back burner and that the EU really has new priorities that it's got to deal with when it comes to Washington now?
Yeah, I think an American-European trade deal is a pretty distant prospect. I remember TTIP essentially fell apart, didn't it, under the Obama era, which Joe Biden was vice president under. It's incredibly complex. As always with these things, it would take many, many years. I don't sense there's an appetite either in Brussels or Washington to go down to a fully comprehensive trading relationship in terms of a broad agreement like TTIP. But clearly there will be strives to try and move away from the rather antagonistic trading relationship that we've seen in recent years under President Trump, with tariffs being put on things like aluminium from both sides. And there's been constant talk in the dying days of the Trump presidency that he may well have slapped tariffs on European cars. I don't think we're going to see anything that we're not going to see a trade war. But you're right in pointing out, you look at what's happened in recent months. Europe has turned to China. It's signed an investment deal with Beijing. Now, that is something the United States didn't want to happen. It's something that the Biden administration made clear they did not want to happen, but Europe went ahead and did it. And that's where I think, again, even on issues like trade, we are going to see this friction and this fractious relationship, because while the United States and Europe do agree on many things, they don't have exactly the same outlook on the future prospects of what they want to see. They clearly have got two different agendas, two competing agendas to a degree. And I think when it carries on with trade, we will see those differences emerge. And while I think we're not likely to see the rhetoric or indeed some of the reality of trade wars in the years to come, that is not to mean to say that it's going to be necessarily an easy relationship over the next 4 years.
Yeah, not necessarily an easy relationship, Darren. And as you were saying, the EU has kind of stepped out of the US's shadow during this Trump era. But as you were evoking earlier, there are lots of areas of convergence, not least the Paris Climate Accords, the Iran deal, where the US has stepped away. How willing is the EU to kind of welcome the US back into the fold when it comes to issues like that? Looks like they'll be going forward hand in hand.
Yeah, indeed. And we must, we always try and find differences sometimes, don't we, Isabel, between politicians. But we do have to remember this is a significant moment in which, as I say, much of Europe is having a pretty big sigh of relief when it comes to the Biden presidency, because they are on the same page on many of those key issues. One of the first executive orders that we're expecting the new President Biden to issue today is to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. That is incredibly important, clearly, for most EU countries. Britain later on this year is hosting COP26, which will be a key moment in which they will be drawing up new targets for lowering carbon emissions. America will be at that table. Joe Biden will be there, and he'll be keen to sign up to those targets. That would not have happened, clearly, under a Trump presidency. Also, Joe Biden today is expected to rejoin the World Health Organization. Pretty symbolic move, but an important one, and a reminder that, again, when it comes to trying to tackle the coronavirus pandemic, European nations will again be pretty much walking, I should say, in lockstep with the United States in trying to tackle that pandemic. Again, that's pretty important. On Iran, on whole swathes of the Middle East, again, the United States will be working with Europe. And that's the big point, is when I say working with, because Joe Biden's made it clear that he is a multi-nationalist and that he likes to work with countries, that he believes in America's old alliances, particularly in Europe, whether they be Germany, France, the United Kingdom, and that he wants to repurpose them. He wants to renew those relationships. And it's clear that whether you're in Berlin, Paris or London, the feeling is pretty mutual. So I suspect that over the coming months, those EU leaders will be racing to their telephones, racing potentially, given the pandemic, we'll have to wait and see, but to get on planes to go and visit Joe Biden in Washington. And we know, of course, the European Parliament and indeed the institutions here in Brussels have invited Joe Biden to come and speak as soon as he possibly can. There are suggestions about March in Strasbourg. I think, given the pandemic, that still seems pretty unlikely. But the invitation is out there, unsurprisingly, and European leaders are keen to rebuild that relationship in a kind of physical sense, as well as the ones that we've seen on social media today.
Yeah, sense there that multilateralism is back, Darren, isn't it? And the EU is very happy to have its old partner back in some respects. Darren McCaffrey for us there in Brussels. Many thanks. Well, for more, let's speak to Nicole Mason. Now, Nicole Mason is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Institute for Women's Policy Research in Washington. Many thanks for joining us on the programme, Nicole. We really appreciate your time. Now, we've said it many times today, Kamala Harris is making history. She's making history on many fronts. But first of all, let's focus on that of her being the first female vice president. Tell us, bring in for us, I guess, what does this mean for women in the US?
Well, this is a very historic moment, and it's been a moment that's been at least 40 years in the making since the start of the U.S. women's movement. And we've seen Shirley Chisholm in 1972 throwing her hat in the ring for the highest level, office in the land, U.S. president, and Hillary Clinton running for office twice. And so Kamala Harris and her election to the second highest office in the land is a victory for all of us. U.S. women's movement. It also signals that we can look forward to more women running for office, taking up leadership roles in the U.S. and in state and local legislatures across the country. So this is just a victorious moment for both, Kamala Harris and also for the country.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a sense, isn't there, that this could really be a domino effect in terms of women coming to power. Domino effect's possibly the wrong metaphor to be using there. But what about the fact that Kamala Harris has these very interesting biracial roots? She's not only of black descent, she's also of Asian descent. How far will that allow her words to penetrate further, let's say, than Joe Biden's, possibly even further than Barack Obama, because he expressed regrets there?
So when I think about what Kamala Harris means to many of us, Black people, women, South Asians, women of color, people of color. She's a true reflection of the diversity and the mosaic of the U.S. in this moment. And also the belief that if you set out to make change, you can, reach one of the highest offices of the land, in the United States. And again, I think that this election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris was a repudiation of much of the hate and divisiveness over the last 4 years. And so, what I'm hoping is that her serving as the vice president will allow her to do really great things, to be a model for women pursuing offices, but young girls across the country that, tells them that they can be ambitious, they can set their mind to whatever and work to achieve it, and people will be there to hold the doors open for you.
She's definitely bringing a message of hope and that of being a role model. Now, if we look in terms, though, of concrete actions that she can take as a vice president, obviously supported by Joe Biden, what do you expect of her in that respect?
Well, we're going to be looking and watching closely over the next few weeks for Kamala Harris's agenda to emerge and her priority issue areas. Right now, as you know, we are dealing with a pandemic that is ravaging the U.S. as well as the economy. So those are day one priorities and issues for both the president and the vice president. What I think will be really important, and I think both the president and vice president know this as well, is that women have been disproportionately impacted by this economic downturn here in the U.S. And so both of them will be looking to place women at the forefront of recovery efforts. And I think Kamala will be leading that charge.
Okay, so Kamala will be leading that charge. How do you want her to be doing that? Because you're absolutely right. People from ethnic minorities and women have been at the forefront of this pandemic. They've really been at the brunt of it. So beyond the kind of economic support, what kind of support can she bring?
Well, what she can do immediately, and what we're going to see over the next couple of weeks, is there's a slew of confirmations, cabinet appointments that have to, make it through the Senate so that we can begin the work of the people. And Kamala Harris will serve as a tiebreaker if there is, gridlock in the Senate. So that's going to be one of her chief roles, and also working across the aisle to get things done. So she's going to be able to do that. We have a $1.9 trillion stimulus and recovery package coming down the pipeline. She's going to be instrumental in whipping both the House as well as the Senate and getting that passed and being a support to the president there. So there's so much work ahead of us. And again, I think it goes without saying, she is quite personable. She has worked in varying capacities, both in the state of California, but also in the Senate. She's a really tough cookie. And so I'm really looking forward to all that she'll be able to bring in this moment where we are facing multiple crises here in the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just evoke there the confirmation hearings. But if we take a step back, were you surprised at how diverse a cast of people Joe Biden has brought around himself as the 46th president?
Well, actually, I'm really not surprised because those are the people who helped him to get elected. And so he is, again, he said very early on that he was going to, dance with the people who brought him to the party. And that's exactly what he's doing. And so that is reflected in many of his appointments. Rachel Levine, one of the first transgender women who will serve as the assistant, the deputy director of Health and Human Services, Heather Boucher, Janet Yellen, Deb Haaland, who will lead the Department of Interior. I mean, these are historic appointments that we cannot ignore. And so all around, I would say this is a very historic moment. The president is leaning into his commitment. And what I'm really excited about is that Democrats control all three chambers and we're going to move an agenda that's really progressive and really reflective of the values and the needs of the people.
Okay, so a progressive agenda there. And as we're speaking, we're looking back at pictures of the inauguration ceremony. What did you make of that, Nicole?
Well, again, I was just moved to tears, actually. I was, texting with colleagues and friends over this morning, and I just can't, I said, I can't believe that we've been in a nightmare for about 4 years and we didn't even realize it. And now this feels like the dawn of a new day. There's dignity restored to the office. The United States will take its rightful place, in the world leadership, and will be acting in unison and the correspondent before with lockstep with many of our allies and partners across the globe. We're joining the World Health Organization. We're going to rejoin the Paris Accord and roll back the global gag rule. So a lot of the damage that has been done over the course of 4 years, Joe Biden is going to move swiftly to roll those, remove those things.
Nicole, I guess if the call for unity in Joe Biden's address was so strong, it's because the U.S. is more divided than ever. Is he the right man? Is Kamala the right person at his side to heal those wounds?
You know, absolutely. I actually think both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in this moment are the right people to do this work. But I also want to say that there can be no unity without accountability. We do have a lot of healing, and there has been a lot of hurt and damage over the last 4 years, and we're going to have to come to terms and reckon with that so that we are able to move forward as, one and as a unified country.
Okay, so no unity without accountability. Nicole Mason, we've really appreciated your time. Many thanks for joining us on this historic day. Now, our team in theCUBE have been monitoring social media as reactions to that swearing in of the 46th President of the United States, Joe Biden, come flowing in. Let's head straight to Matthew in theCUBE.
Well, Isabel, Joe Biden has officially tweeted for the first time as the 46th President of the United States from his official account, saying that he is going to waste no time at all. Joe Biden tweeting that that's why today I am heading straight to the Oval Office to get right to work delivering bold action, he says, and immediate relief for American families. We've heard that he's due to sign around 15 presidential decrees in the immediacy following his anointment and following his ceremony and the inauguration as president. Those words echoed also by the Vice President Kamala Harris, who also said on Twitter that she is ready to serve. Immediate reaction coming in on Twitter. Now, when it comes to the speech that Joe Biden gave, a lot of people online noting the references that he made to, for example, Abraham Lincoln. And you have the Democratic Coalition, who on Twitter have said that this was a speech for the ages, one of the greatest speeches in American history. He is, they say, our president for everyone. That is the reaction to the inauguration speech by Joe Biden. But when it comes to the ceremony as a whole, a lot of other things have certainly caught people's attentions online. Google Trends, who monitor the search engines around the world, in the immediate reaction to the ceremony in Washington, D.C., they confirmed that "This Land Is Your Land" was the top trending Google search query in the world in the past hour. Of course, a reference there to the song that was sung at the ceremony by Jennifer Lopez. Meanwhile, another person who certainly drew the eyes was the poet Amanda Gorman, 22-year-old poet. And here again, Google Trends saying that that was the top trending search in the United States the immediate hour after she spoke at Joe Biden's inauguration. Immediate reaction coming in on social media. But Isabel, I think one thing notable to note there is that many people who had suggested there might be similar scenes to what we saw in Washington, D.C. on January the 6th have been disappointed. Yesterday in theCUBE, we spoke to Dr. Jen Goldbeck, and she told us that the overall sense of those QAnon conspiracists and other right-wing Trump supporters was one of resignation. And so far on Twitter and on social media, that is definitely the case. Overall, the feeling around the world is one of celebration, congratulations messages both to Joe Biden, but also as well to the Vice President Kamala Harris.
Okay, well, many thanks, Matt, for bringing all of that in for us. Now, as we were saying, the largest ever security operation has been underway for the swearing in of Joe Biden. And we're now going to speak to Ray Suarez, who has been outside and monitoring all of this. Hello there to you, Ray. Well, we can see the security detail behind you, but as Matt is saying, been pretty much a peaceful event. But let's just look at, Joe Biden's inauguration ceremony, because as the dust settles on that, and as you kind of think about all the things that were said, what were the key takeaways for you?
Well, Joe Biden takes the presidency at a time when experts, historians, political scientists are saying they've got one of the most daunting inboxes since Franklin Roosevelt took the office at the height of the Depression. He's got a cratering economy, rising unemployment, and record numbers of new COVID infections and deaths from the disease. Week in and week out, instead of trending down, we're setting new records. This is kind